So the controls in 2 Human are really unique, and I think part of the reason why we tried to take this unique control scheme with the right analog combat was because we had a lot of RPG stuff, we had a lot of action stuff, and those are pretty overwhelmingly complex genres both on their own. So we wanted to make sure that the core basic gameplay was as accessible as possible. And we broke it down to the kind of raw principle of point at the enemy you want to attack. Now, some of the things that you can do is a lot more advanced. You can use 2 sticks together. You can double tap in a certain direction. You can 2-in-1 combos from a slide into a runer and things like that. And they'll all get you benefits in the game. You'll get more combo meter. You'll get combo back faster, things like that. But the core principle of the game was to keep it very accessible and then to bring that depth on as the player goes throughout the game. I don't think any depth was sacrificed for that accessibility. I just think that the gameplay is different. It's something that a lot of people inherently kind of pick up and want to tap the stick a bunch, and it's just something that feels a little bit different. If you look at it back, to more something like Diablo, which is a type of game where you're literally just point and click, 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 there's infinitely more depth here because this game took a different spin on the action. And I think that as players get in, they earn the other moves, they start realizing how their combo meter works and how important that is not only to the action but the RPG, and they start learning all the other stick stuff. The gun combat at its core, it's pull the triggers to fire, but then you can manipulate it with the right analog stick into which way you want to manually aim. And it literally becomes in some rooms, like Robotron or Geometry Wars. And players pick up on that once they kind of figure it out. It takes a little bit of a learning curve because it's a bit different to actually feel the depth, but the inherent nature of point at a guy, people get right away. Well, I think 2 Human is hopefully kind of carving its own genre. It's definitely a third-person action RPG, but the thing that I feel really strongly about is that the RPG elements that are there complement the action, and the action elements that are there complement the RPG. The ultimate goal, and we've already seen it, is the action guy runs around, he starts doing his combos and his 2-in-1s and things like that, and his finisher moves, and he starts going, man, I really need that loot. That guy had this unbelievable armor, I gotta go get that. And the RPG guy is sitting there going, I'm decked out and I'm awesome and I got the best gear, and he sees a guy do this really cool move over there and he goes, I gotta do that. How did he do that? Well, the trilogy for 2 Human, it's obviously been planned from the very beginning, and I think the most important thing though to say is that the first game is compartmentalized. It's its own game. It's very much full on its own. It's not a Saturday matinee cliffhanger. There's an ending, there's a story, there's character depth, there's direction. You get a very full experience out of the first game. As you go through the game though, your character, more like an MMO, he grows with you, he levels. He gains skill points, he goes into skill trees, he customizes himself. That's the type of stuff that carries over through the trilogy. So you do feel like you're evolving not only as a player, but as your character. And of course, in addition to that, the story, the universe, all that stuff's been planned out as a trilogy from the ground up. So there's character arcs, there's twists, there's turns, there's characters that are really important to the story that are introduced as the trilogy goes along, and all that stuff is really, really there too. Well, I think the whole idea is to empower the player. We want them to feel like a god. And one of the first things we do is we throw the kind of goblin enemies at them. And once people catch on really quick, they can just wade through the goblin enemies. And my joke is that they just basically become fuel for your combo meter. So, the idea is jump in, smack a bunch of people around, get that visceral feel, that you're laying the smackdown on guys. And then start introducing some of the more depth. The guys with the shield that you have to start using some of the other moves to take out. The guys with the missiles that you have to dodge roll away from and have to sneak in there and get a finisher on them, otherwise they'll jump away and try and missile you again. I think that's the type of stuff that's very important to the game's pacing, and we slowly kind of pepper that in. So the goal for the pacing is actually really complex, and it goes back to Silicon Knight's kind of engagement theory with the fact that all 5 facets of the game design is important to the overall experience: game design and gameplay, audio, story, visuals, and technology. When all those things work hand in hand, you get an experience for the user where the music just starts picking up in the middle of a battle, and it makes the battle cooler. They know who the characters are because they're interested in their character development, and it makes you feel like you're more connected to that character. And all of that type of pacing goes along. You go through a couple of rooms, you think you've seen some stuff, you think you've got an idea, and then you go to a cinema or you go over to cyberspace, and suddenly there's a whole lot of new stuff to learn. So the story propels the gameplay, which propels the story, which propels the gameplay, and that's really the core goal here. So in a co-op experience, it's really hinged on the characters' customizations and the way the classes play against each other. There's a big tool set with the classes that actually work well in conjunction with each other. The battle cries and some of the special powers that the classes get actually affect the whole group. So if you have a berserker with you, he's actually going to make you a bit better in melee. if you have a bioengineer, he's going to be able to heal you. If you have a tank and a bioengineer, you're not going to be plowing through rooms instantly, but you're going to be tough to take down. So there's a lot of dynamics there that carry over directly from the single player to the Xbox Live experience when you play co-op. But the biggest important thing is that you go ahead and you go exactly how you want in the story. If you want to play through the whole game with your friend, you can go ahead and do that. If you want to play through in snippets, you can do that as well. If you want to experience the cinematics, you can do that. If you don't have to as well. There's also a cinema theater viewer, so if you do end up playing online and you miss something and you want to go back, you can go back and take a look at that stuff. So it's really the full single-player experience if you want it in co-op. There's definitely going to be, pluses and minuses. Some people will be stronger at some things than others, and the bioengineer is probably the biggest extreme, but he obviously heals himself as well as his group. So as you go through the single player, you've got different paths, similar to fire and ice wizards and stuff like that. You can actually be the kind of fighter healer. So you can buff yourself and get your stats up to where you would be if you were a fighter, and you could augment that throughout your skill tree as well. So if you want to be a single player centric bioengineer, you can actually do that through the skill tree. So if you want to respec your character, you cannot change the class, but you can change the choices you've made in the skill tree, and that will exponentially become more costly to you as you do it. So you'll have to pay bounty, which is essentially money, and money is used to repair your armor, to buy equipment in the shops, to actually manufacture blueprints, which are some of the more rarest items in the game, and you'll essentially have to balance out that economy with yourself of how many times can I essentially afford to respec. Everything from single player transfers over to co-op. That's the whole goal of the game, is if you want to play with your buddy who just happens to play for 5 minutes every night, you can go ahead and do that and still feel like you're getting somewhere. If you want to go ahead and play single player by yourself, you can go ahead and do that. One thing that we haven't talked about a lot that's really important is the actual setups, the enemy placement, the rooms, the enemies in them, they change. So as you play the level over again, or as you play the level in co-op, or even just as you level your character, if you come back to the same area, you can see a completely different setup. So you can walk into that first room that was nothing but a whole bunch of goblins coming after you. You can come back there and it's a different race. You can come back there and there's 2 trolls. So it's a different experience as you go through the game, and there's tons of variations. Those guys who are fire and ice, those guys come in somewhat randomly, but still controlled. So you can go ahead and play a room, and even those guys alone are going to be different. All of a sudden, instead of an ice guy, there's a normal guy, or instead of an ice guy, there's a poison guy. So the cyberspace areas in the wells are directly tied into the real world, where you can go into the wells, open up doors and open up areas that otherwise wouldn't have been accessible. There are some kind of locked areas that you have to go through and solve the kind of task. None of them are really very puzzly. But the cool thing is that they really reward you at your own pace. There's a lot of story in there that you can get that you would miss if you didn't go in there. There's background stuff, there's things about the Norns and that type of stuff. There's also explorable areas, there's items you can't get anywhere other than there. But I think most importantly is you actually get powers in there. Like you saw in the video, you can open the doors. You'll get powers where you can walk on water. And it's got kind of a Metroid feeling, where you'll go in a couple cyberspace areas and you'll see some obelisks, which are treasure chests, aside an island in the water. And then you'll get the power to walk on water and you go, oh, I can go back there and get that loot. So it's a whole exploration thing, but it's really, for the most part, at your pace. And it goes through our kind of philosophy of, we want to give you a deep experience, but we also want to just make you feel really cool to hit a bunch of guys, right? And for the guys who really want the deep experience, they can dive as deep as they want to get. They can find out more about the mythology. They can actually find out some unique tricks about the stat powers and the bonuses. And for the guys who just want to go through and plow a bunch of stuff and have some really fun time kicking butt, they can do that too. Well, I think there's always a fine balance between how the skill sets are accessible, how customizable they are, and how powerful they let a player get. The idea of the game is to be a god and to be very powerful, but there's a lot of challenges, and those challenges will even evolve with you. So you could deck yourself out in a way to be very, very strong with ranged attacks, but you're going to get enemies that are incredibly resistant to ranged attacks. So that stuff should be able to balance itself out. I mean, it's tough to say, but if the problem is that bad, there's obviously always options of patching and stuff. For the most part, though, if a player gets really, really powerful and they're having fun and they're blasting through stuff, that's great.